I listened to James Galbraith, who spoke quite eloquently about how economists risk everything trying to put something out there because there's only a handful of people that are actually on stage and in advisory roles. And so once you step out, the excommunication of an academic renders you a YouTuber and a blogger, as opposed to somebody who's in position to advise kings. You are excommunicated. In fact, you may not even be able to teach university. And this is a form of message control. And while certainly there is a bourgeois element to academia, there's also a worker element. And to me, if you work for a paycheck, you're working class.
Yeah. If you are selling your labor power for sustenance, or you can't rely on wealth to provide a sustainment of basic needs and luxuries, you are the working class.
Amen.
That's it. If you're getting a paycheck and you depend on that, you are the working class.
I think that people do not have a knowledge of what the working class means. It's seen as divisive, and here comes the socialists again.
Don't talk about class. It doesn't exist. Come on.
And all that Red Scare stuff crops back up. And then you get to hear every version of what the Bolsheviks were and what Soviet was, and Mao's a murderer. And we don't gauge the number of murders that capitalism has committed. The idea that austerity is murder. All the people without health care and can't take care of their basic needs of survival. All the different places where we've gone to clear markets in the name of capital and have starved neo-colonial communities by making them give us their cash crops while they starve. The list of crimes capitalism has committed dwarfs by any measure, anything, that any speck in the eye of your communist friend, the capitalist log is absolutely devastating. What do you suppose it will take to help people see this?
I've said to many folks, whether in general conversation or teacher, that yes, this Red Scare is pretty paramount and prevalent, and it's obviously intentional, which negates any thinking of what could be a good alternative, not the idea that there is no alternative. What keeps us going are the folks who do think that there is actually a great alternative, in fact, a very effective alternative, is that what belies that pessimism is a modicum of optimism, because otherwise, why wouldn't we be thinking like this in the first place? So it's just keep plugging along and making these complex topics easier to understand. Like austerity is in fact murder if we actually expose what in fact it does.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ultimate source of deprivation, monetarily, fiscally, etc. Monetary because it causes unemployment, like we talked about when we raise interest rates, or if it's used for short-termism when interest rates are zero. Fiscally, because it's ultimately putting social provisioning on the chopping block, which ultimately leads to more deprivation, loss of childcare, loss of healthcare, loss of housing. And then there's some more outright warfare, which is literally killing people for cash crops, or literally killing people for resources, which I would put under the context of austerity, because austerity should be called deprivation. Austerity is deprivation. Austerity is murder, like you said, because that's what it is. When put in practice on behalf of a system which is based on profit, which is capitalism, austerity is a mechanism to ensure that deprivation is promoted so that order can be sustained and propagated.
I want to bring something up, and I think this is not really well thought through, but it doesn't take much. It's not hard to see this. Throughout the United States, we have allowed our infrastructure to crumble over the last 50 years. And one of the things that came out was a study on the condition of bridges throughout the United States. The vast majority of bridges were derated, like take your life in your own hands. And why would we let that happen? Anybody that's owned a car knows that you've got to plan for some maintenance on the car. We have allowed our cities, our power grid, our water systems to crumble. And by part of our reach for empire and this use of the IMF through structural adjustments and exporting neoliberalism around the world, as the world has clapped back and said we've had enough, we are now in a position where we had to do something to buy time. We screwed up. We didn't plan. We didn't do this stuff. And so now we've got Russia and China as demons, when in reality, Russia's just been doing its thing while China, and this is probably the most salient point, for the last 2 years, SCOTUS, in his State of the Union, has gone out of his way to talk about how China is the bad guy. And they've been ramping up a Cold War and a proxy war. And why is that? When you allow austerity to infect your homeland and you don't take care of the necessary upgrades, people end up dying, whether they die from the falling apart of the infrastructure or from the false narratives that go into creating war to bring about military Keynesianism to allow investment to be made by stealth through palatable ways with flag waving and parades. And so, to what degree do you feel we have any chance of exposing this? Because right now, I see an anti-war movement that is up in arms about war, but do not fundamentally understand the economics at play that are driving said war. They always say follow the money, but I don't see them mentally following the money. I just see them seeing the bullets and the bombs. And I sympathize with that tremendously, but I also have an austerity understanding. I understand the economic angle. It feels like a much bigger picture that people just can't get their mind wrapped around.
Here's why I would link what happened in Ohio to what you just said.
Perfect.
So whenever we have, whether it's war on terror, which now transitioning to the new Cold War, I forget who said it, but when one war ends, another one begins. And that's just the product of a system that depends on divisiveness in conflict to perpetuate. Now, if the new Cold War was the anti-terrorism or the Red Scare in the past, it all fits a consistent tagline. Make sure the system is divisive and conflict-ridden to maintain markets abroad and pacification at home. Now, this is where I'm being optimistic and actually can help the anti-war movement, which you mentioned. If we can break the pacification by linking the austerity that ultimately revealed itself in Ohio with a toxic bomb because of neglect on infrastructure, which allowed a train full of poisonous gases to go off its rails and plague an entire community. This is revealing that this was institutional benign neglect. Face value, this is it. And if we can link this, so why are we paying attention to bringing freedom and all that junk abroad and preventing the big bad monster that is Russia and Ukraine, which is actually a lot more complex than what the establishment says it is, or China parading Taiwan, which is actually more complex, actually has to do with resources in the South China Sea, but that doesn't get talked about, just like energy in the North Stream doesn't get talked about in Ukraine. But there's a reason, because if you can just focus on the ideological hegemony that supports foreign policy, you can deny plausibility of the institutional benign neglect that's happening at home with our infrastructure being the way it is. If we can link them, I think that is a tremendous opportunity to show WTF. Very academic to say WTF, right?
I love it.
But it is. It's literally a WTF moment. Bad. What's that city that still doesn't have clean water?
Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, Flint, Michigan. Thanks. Hello. There are people that still don't have clean water in the United States of America. So I'm not ultimately defeatist saying that, well, nobody can link this up. I think the forces are revealing itself that we can link this. And if we make it more of an effort to connect the lack of drinking water in Michigan, the environmental disaster by the train derailment in Ohio, and even the toxic gas bomb, which is going to hit Salt Lake with the depleting Salt Lake, if we can link those, there's a chance that the divisiveness that comes with the militarism, which the system depends on, can effectively be unraveled by a burgeoning, strengthening anti-war movement, which shouldn't just be a strength and be a weakness, which seems to have an ebb and flow. I think that's the maintenance of its consistency, if that can be engendered.
I go back to a quote from a movie called The Cross of Iron with James Coburn. It's a quote that I think is very pertinent here, and that's by Karl von Clausewitz, which says, "War is not an independent phenomenon, but the continuation of politics by different means." This is why I say austerity is murder, because that is the essence of what von Clausewitz is saying.
You're right. You're spot on. That's exactly what Clausewitz said. That is exactly the definition.
I wish that there was a place that I could scream that people would hear and make them consume this and fundamentally change the way they function based on knowledge of this, because there is no war greater than this. Everything from the environment to healthcare to the way we go and fight smaller countries in pursuit of extraction. Books like Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which have been knocked for being somewhat over the top. I'm not sure that they are, and I've talked about this with several people. I really have come to believe that if we're not stridently trying to bring forth the impact of austerity and neoliberal, neocolonial actions, we will never fully understand the war that we're in. We'll just keep going through life thinking that we can just vote for the next progressive and everything will change.
Yeah.